Amber Holt is going to talk about tomboys, baby Dykes, and girls who don't feel all right, how adults can help girls get to adult human female, which is what we want to do. And after that, we're going to hear from Shannon, HearShe, and then after that, we're going to hear from Exulansic, update on coverage of I Am Jazz Season 8. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And over to you, Amber.
I'm Amber Alt. I'm both a sociologist and a therapist. Joe's already introduced my talk. It's a long talk. It's got 3 parts. The first part is the history of the problem. The second part is what do we do to get to girls to adult human female from a macro perspective, and then what do we do at a micro perspective. So here goes. In 1919, Magnus Hirschfeld, a wealthy gay physician, sexologist, and human rights campaigner, established in Berlin the Institute for Sexual Science, a hybrid clinical, social, and activist space that became an internationally known gathering point for people considered by the broader European society as sexual deviants, in particular homosexual men, transvestites, and eventually transsexuals, many of whom seem to have been, by today's standards, men with autogynephilia. Hirschfeld sympathized with the feminist movement, but focused decidedly on men and male sexuality. The Institute housed an activist organization dedicated to repealing the German statute criminalizing homosexuality, paragraph 195, and became a repository for an extensive mailing list of gay men, others considered deviant, and their supporters. Hirschfeld worked at both the micro and the macro level, treating patients and trying to make German society safer for them. In 1923, Hirschfeld introduced the concept of the transsexual into the vernaculars of the new science of sexology. He used the term broadly for sex role nonconformists, for men who felt like women, and for homosexuals. Hirschfeld and other European sexologists also coined another term, inversion. The idea that people who experience same-sex attraction are born in the wrong body. In the case of women, this became men trapped in women's bodies. The Institute began to experiment in changing men into women as a treatment for homosexuality, gender incongruence, and autogynephilia, a project that assumed some exogenous hormones and surgical remodeling would allow gay men to pass as straight women. The Danish painter Einar Wegener, also known as Lily Elbe, became Hirschfeld's most famous experimental subject. Surgeons at the Institute first castrated Wegener, then indulged him in 3 more surgeries for removal of his penis, the implant of an ovary, and when that wasn't enough, in a pattern of escalating investment, sunk costs, and sexual appropriation, the implant of a uterus, following the fantasy that it would allow Elba to become pregnant at the age of 48. I open with this history because of a couple important details often missing from it. One of the physicians involved with Elba's surgeries, Irving Gorbant, was at the time of Elba's 1931 uterus implant, the director of a women's health clinic. Fancy that. And ultimately, he became a high-ranking Nazi physician running experiments at Dachau. In the current retelling of the life-changing reassignment surgery of Lily Elba, the life change being an early and tragic demise post-op, writers refer to the ovary and uterus implanted in Elba's male body as tissue, as in uterine tissue was implanted. Note the passive voice. Questions that should haunt all of us. What were the names of the women whose reproductive organs Elba received? What were the circumstances under which they were harvested? Were those women informed? Were they coerced? Were they compensated? And what does Lily Elba's receipt of literally anonymous and disembodied female organs of generation for the gratification of male fantasies of becoming female and constructing females tell us about the male gaze of early sexology? Is this the origin of the effort to reduce women to uterus havers? And as trans activists in the current era lobby to position biological males as infertile females eligible for womb transplants, and ethicists explore female whole body organ donation for the purpose of gestating while brain dead, what can we learn from the invisibility of women whose ovary somehow ended up in Lily Elba? While Hirschfeld focused on homosexuality in Berlin, British sexologist Havelock Ellis paid more attention to the female form of inversion. World War I had allowed many lesbians to serve in the armed forces and solidify a lesbian culture in which women found each other, socialized with each other, and empowered themselves to violate the social norm of dependence on men. Same-sex desire and same-sex romantic, sexual, and social life became more visible, provoking the curiosity of progressives and the outrage of conservatives. Increasingly aware that female partners were not just romantic friends, sexology began to formulate theories to explain why, given the opportunity, many women would choose as their social, sexual, and life partners other women. Some sexological theories conceptualize women's same-sex attractions as deviance resulting from arrested development. Some explained lesbianism as a sign of moral degeneration. Havelock Ellis eventually settled on the idea that same-sex attraction reflected natural human variation. He couldn't relinquish the idea of inversion, despite the obvious limitations of the narcissistic idea that lesbianism reflected a man in a woman's body situation. For example, the theory focused on women who chose masculine pursuits and female partners, but it couldn't explain the homosexuality of women who are conventional in their femininity. What could possibly explain non-inverted women's attraction to inverts? If two female inverts partnered, were they a gay male couple trapped in women's bodies? You can hear the which one is the woman and which one is the man question here, and see the heterosexual template imposed upon female, especially lesbian sexuality. Even when other sexologists, particularly in America, engaged in rigorous scientific comparisons of the bodies of lesbians with heterosexual women, they found no biological, anatomical, or otherwise physiological differences. What I'm saying here is the question of whether inversion explained anything was answered 100 years ago. In light of this, Ellis concluded that while butch androgynous stereotype-defying badass lesbians were shockingly normal females in our embodiment, we had come into the world with a masculine spirit. When science fails to confirm a sexist bias, go for the metaphysical explanation rather than ditch your theory. And here, a pause to tip my lesbian softball cap to Exulansic, who is mapping the current incarnation of the mystical church of trans that evolved from the idea of the invert. So continuing on, Ellis' scientifically untenable theory of masculine spirits tragically trapped in female bodies might have extinguished itself, save for the intervention of British lesbian socialite writer Radcliffe Hall. Hall was quite conservative. She was a converted Catholic and taken with spiritualism. She'd had a successful first novel before she turned her attention to her masterwork, The Well of Loneliness, which she envisioned as a story that would evoke sympathy and understanding for the plight of female inverts. To be clear, Radcliffe Hall was herself doing okay, given her station, but she liked the heterocentric ideas of the sexologists with whom she rubbed elbows. She felt inspired by the badass lesbian ambulance drivers among her friends, and she wanted the world to see the world be friendlier toward women. Stephen Gordon, the protagonist of The Well, is a strong, tall, smart, woman-loving invert who suffers her share of heartbreak and rejection before she finds love with Mary, who she meets, of course, in the ambulance corps. They get friendly with another couple, and when one of those women dies, the other commits the obligatory lesbian novel suicide. Stephen worries that the life is too much for Mary, and ultimately engages in what is supposed to be understood as an act of butch altruism to manipulate her normal girl partner into leaving her for a man, delivering the classic sad lesbian ending. Finally, Stephen, in a phrase anticipating trans ideology rhetoric at present, implores God, give us the right to our existence. As an aside, one wonders whether the masterminds of trans ideology used the well as base code, but I digress. Despite its perspective that inversion is God-given, The Well isn't an empowering novel, nor a racy one. We can hear how it presages the ideas that lesbians as inverts are doomed to kill ourselves, perhaps if we don't become real men, even if the data don't and have never supported this, and how it reinforces the pseudoscience that lesbians are men stuck in women's bodies. And yet the novel, published in 1928, created a furor in England. where the British court declared it obscene because it defended unnatural practices between women. Diana Suhami in the Trials of Radcliffe Hall notes that Hall's subversion was that she dared, pay attention here, to change pronouns, to cover up lesbianism, to write "she kissed her" on the lips, where other writers concealed themselves behind allusions. She spoke out. Suhami notes that the British government determined that the book's use of accurate same-sex pronouns would blight society's morals and corrupt the young. At root, it was not Radcliffe Hall's book that was on trial, but her prosecutor's attitude toward lesbianism. We see here the perpetual outrage provoked by keeping those pronouns, women's sexual autonomy, and same-sex desire real. The novel wouldn't be published again in Britain until 1959. Across the pond, however, The Well of Loneliness became a sensation thanks to its notoriety and remained the most commonly read novel among lesbians for decades. Although it provided us a touchstone, it also underwrote the ongoing idea that women who defy sex stereotypes are men in women's bodies, and that lesbian life centers on the inevitable loss of our lovers to men, suicides, and social rejection. There were no Olivia Cruzes in The Well of Loneliness. It became a trope of lesbian novels for the following decades that there were no happy endings, no old Dykes in the garden, no Susan B. Anthony Memorial Unrest Home. Publishing believed that happy and lesbian constituted contradictions in terms until we ourselves began to found our own presses, own our own bookstores, and publish the damn books. But that comes later. On May 6th, 1933, 90 years ago this spring, Nazis invaded Hirschfeld's clinic. All of the books in Hirschfeld's extensive library were removed and burned in public. Nazis confiscated the mailing lists and patient lists and used them to round up sexual deviants, male and female, Jewish and non-Jewish. Irvin Gorbant, the women's clinic director and surgeon who supplied Elba with female parts, stayed and became the chief medical officer of the Luftwaffe and the principal investigator on perverse Nazi experiments at Dachau. Important to know this. During the post-war years, lesbian culture put down roots again. Gay male culture, also ignited by homosocial experiences of military service, evolved. With it became greater repression. In the US, laws against same-sex sexuality justified harassment of both lesbians and gay men, making us vulnerable to job loss, family loss, forced sterilization, and egregious forms of conversion therapy. In 1959, the first edition of the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic and Statistical Manual made homosexuality a mental illness, further opening the door to medical abuses against gay and lesbian people, including chemical castration, similar to the so-called gender-affirming medical care of the current era, lobotomy, various medically coordinated sexual aversion therapies, and psychotherapy designed to rewire same-sex attractions. With the emergence of a wave of progressive activism in the late 1960s, gay and lesbian activists recognized the APA's pathologizing of homosexuality as central to our medicalization and oppression. The brilliant lesbian activist Barbara Giddings, in collaboration with gay activist Frank Kameny, designed a multi-layered approach to educating the APA, challenging the APA, protesting the APA, and cleverly trolling the APA, with the goal of removing homosexuality as a DSM diagnosis. 50 years ago, last spring, they staged a powerful intervention at the APA conference in Philadelphia, offering a panel session in which Dr. Anonymous, a gay psychiatrist in disguise, made the case for homosexuals and called to account the organization that had quietly looked the other way when gay psychiatrists used the annual meeting to network and offer each other support in a group they jokingly called the Gay PA. That year, the APA removed homosexuality from the DSM. So this was an incredible life-changing win for gay men and lesbians, but barely had it landed when the APA concocted a new diagnosis, gender identity disorder, both of adulthood and of childhood. In the early 1970s, in the midst of the heyday of the second wave of feminism in the United States, the free to be you and me era, the advent of Title IX, multiple wins for women and girls on multiple fronts, the APA decided that boys who play with Barbies and girls who refuse could and should be treated. It's clear from the writing at the time that psychologists knew that many gender nonconforming kids would grow up to be gay and lesbian. Now that homosexuality could not be treated per se, the idea behind gender identity disorder was to read childhood gender nonconformity as proto-homosexuality and to prevent homosexual adulthood by treating sissiness in boys and tomboyness in girls. The original treatment for gender identity disorder of adulthood was sex reassignment surgery. The treatment for children was therapy designed to force kids into behaviors that aligned with sex stereotypes. Generally speaking, intensive regressive behavioral therapies didn't prevent gay and lesbian kids from growing up to be gay and lesbian adults, though it did traumatize them. You can imagine subjecting a tomboy or baby dyke to an inpatient stay requiring her to put on makeup every morning or learn to walk like a girl. It would do nothing for her self-acceptance. So despite no evidence that sex stereotype nonconformity responded to the regressive behavioral treatments designed as gender therapy by male psychiatrists, the gender identity diagnosis persisted. Between DSM-4 and 5, however, trans activists began to challenge the diagnosis, arguing correctly that gender nonconformity was not a disorder. Unlike Giddings and Kameny and Dr. Anonymous, however, they didn't argue that the diagnosis should be eliminated. Their dream was not to prevent medicine's interference with gender nonconforming people. Their dream was to access sex reassignment technologies without carrying a diagnosis of either a physical or mental illness. I engaged in participant observation at a trans activist protest of the APA in Chicago in 1997. At a meeting with representatives of the APA's Gay and Lesbian Caucus, I observed the activists struggling to make the case that trans people were oppressed as homosexuals had been. Unlike lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, however, the trans activists argued for medicalization. They first claimed that gender nonconformity is a medical condition like diabetes, and therefore required ongoing access to cross-sex hormones, but shouldn't be seen as an illness. Then they argued that gender nonconformity is like pregnancy, a physical condition that needs medical care, although unlike pregnancy, their medical needs were ongoing and lifelong. Then they argued that sex reassignment surgery was comparable to rhinoplasty, which is often elective, while also arguing that sex reassignment is not cosmetic and should proceed from a diagnosable condition so that US insurers will pay for it. Clearly, Barbara Giddings didn't write their pitch. If anything, the presentation demonstrated trans activists' embrace of the same medical interventions that had already been used to torture stigmatized gay and lesbian people for decades. In DSM-5, the current edition of the psychiatric nosology, GID has been replaced by gender dysphoria, but the same tired sexist stereotypes remain. And it's upon this diagnosis that child and adolescent transition now depend. Most kids who are gender questioning or gender dysphoric still see a resolution of their gender concerns in adulthood without medical treatment. But rather than acknowledge this empirical truth, the gender industry has identified a new market in children. And since 2018 in the United States, with the endorsement of the American Association of Pediatrics, has begun to use the same invasive treatments on kids formerly reserved for adults. The urgency of medicalizing children at younger and younger ages speaks to the awareness that left to their own developmental processes, most gender questioning kids will begin to feel comfortable in their native sex as they discover sexuality and deprive the gender industry of customers. There are now 100 pediatric gender clinics in the United States. Other people have worked out the math of the mind-boggling income generated by patients given lifelong medical disabilities and dependency as a result of conditions created by childhood sex-destructive interventions. Any of us who have even questioned these practices have been marginalized, re-educated, shut down, shut up, disciplined, stigmatized, defamed, deplatformed, and threatened. Last week's Let Women Speak event in New Zealand demonstrated the force with which this big money-backed misogyny responds to women attempting to shine the light of truth on it. The idea is to make an example of one of us, to terrorize the rest of us into freeing, into feeling the fear of voicing our concern. In this industry, actors deliver punishments through two primary mechanisms of social control. One, violence and threats of violence, and two, economic sanctions and credible threats of economic sanction. The harassment and attempted vilification, public terrorizing, and attempts to cancel J.K. Rowling, Maya Forstater, Kathleen Stock, and Kelly J. Keane provide the best known examples in recent years. It's been highly effective until New Zealand. As a result, children in the US have continued to be both indoctrinated and medicalized in greater and greater numbers, with girls proving especially vulnerable to social contagion, now outpacing boys by 4,000% in the medical numbers. So there's never been any demonstrated biological or anatomical difference between female inverts, that's us, lesbians, or gender nonconforming women, and heterosexual women, even after a century of looking. There's never been a way to change a member of our sexually dimorphic species into the other sex, despite a century of trying. And despite decades of cutting and shocking and chemically castrating same-sex attracted people, there's been no effective way of changing sexual orientation or any valid reason for trying. But rather than give up the project, psychiatry and medicine have colluded with and been co-opted by big money and very clever but truly sinister actors into suspending disbelief, suspending critical thinking, suspending scientific inquiry, and allowing themselves to become complicit in recirculating the 19th century pseudoscientific theory that a girl or woman who doesn't feel that she is the right kind of female must, in there somewhere, have a male soul that will be liberated by the destruction of her female body. That's the end of part one. So, how the hell do we get girls to adult human female, given the widespread institutional capture of medicine, education, the media, and the law? What would Barbara Giddings do? Just like the old patriarchy, the new patriarchy is already hegemonic. From the capture of women's public restrooms, the elimination of women's sports, the ubiquitous subversions of reality-based language, to laws that prevent physicians and therapists from doing anything other than affirm, 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 we'll need to work both to address the systemic challenges on the path to adult human female and to support the girls traveling that very fraught path. So at the micro level, how do we make the path visible and how do we protect it? We must recognize the capture happened not through grassroots activism, but through well-funded political lobbying and deal-making. This is why people feel so shocked and surprised to realize men are in women's prisons, men are on women's and girls' teams, and in women's and girls' bathrooms. Because the laws, policies, and deals have been made in a top-down manner. They have been rolled down rather than rolled up, as from the social justice movements with which we are familiar. Like many women around the world, I watched in horror last weekend as a terrifying, mostly male mob assaulted Kelly Jane Keane and the women assembled for a Let Women Speak event in Auckland. The dense, chaotic, roiling crowd perfectly embodied the pressures and horrors of the institutional and cultural capture we now face. The scene reproduced the persecution of women in the Inquisition, the witch hunts, Afghanistan, Iran. Education, medicine, law, the media now work in concert to strangle the category of woman and single-sex spaces we have created. Our rights to peaceably assemble, exercise freedom of speech, and not be forced to practice a belief system that subverts reality. Recognizing this, we must establish in every country political parties of women, by women, for women, with the solidarity of men who care about women. We must leverage our economic power, supporting pro-woman businesses and withholding our business from as many institutions as possible who do not stand with women. We must provide education and training to policymakers, politicians, CEOs, healthcare providers, and the media on the scientific evidence that youth transition is ultimately damaging and an inappropriate treatment for the distress of girls. It is not gender-affirming care. It is sex-destructive experimentation. When those of us advocating the end of violence against women, women's right to freedom from discrimination in employment and law, etc., are accused of transphobia, we must see that accusation itself as narcissistic gaslighting and distraction, flipping the script, colonizing victimization, making the conversation about them. We must stay on point and give others, the media, politicians, physicians, therapists, and family members, accurate information and clarity about the importance of retaining or returning women's sex-based rights and single-sex spaces and services for girls and women. Being pro-woman is not inherently anti-trans. Trans ideology, including the pushback, makes it hard to discuss not only women's privacy, dignity, safety, and same-sex spaces, but also the possibility of treating gender dysphoric adults with dignity without destroying women's spaces. We must reclaim our language. I think we all know that. We are female before we are born, when we are born, and throughout our lives. We're not assigned. If the inclusive language crew were serious, they would have been speaking not only of uterus havers, but also of testicle bearers and of pregnant women and trans men, rather than pregnant people. But the asymmetries make clear that inclusion is not the goal. We must return to the honest, exacting, accurate, reality-based language, describing sex and sexism, reserving the category woman as adult human female. We need both radical and liberal strategies, working inside captured institutions and recreating institutions and processes outside of captured and destroyed institutions. Barbara Giddings would probably focus on the Departments of Health and Justice, the AMA, the American Association of Pediatrics, the federal government departments that have been captured, and our old nemesis, the APA. As detransitioners become more visible and their disabilities more apparent, the lawsuits will happen. Making detransitioners visible in these spaces and supporting their visibility and litigation against medical institutions and therapists who have served as gatekeepers will be vital. The American organization WOLF is leading the way in lawsuits and petitions in these areas already. And a personal call in, if you are a healthcare provider, social worker, or therapist, stop. Familiarize yourself with the reasons the Tavistock and Karolinska pediatric transition clinics were closed. Stop writing the authorization letters, prescribing experimental blockers and hormones, and seeing it as a kindness or social justice to affirm cross-sex identity. We have been made complicit. Educate your colleagues and your patients. Even if you can't speak up, you can stand your ground. Girls and young women need to be exposed to active, lively, wise women and stories of female resistance, bravery, and courage. We will need allies, straight and gay men, adult trans women, adult trans men who care about children and women, fathers, brothers, uncles, husbands, their time, their resources, their commitment. And here, a special call in to gay men. This is our AIDS crisis. Lesbians stepped up during the horrible decade prior to the effective treatment of HIV. We came out, we worked hard, and we offered you solidarity and care when you were targeted for harassment, abuse, and genocide. And we need you now. If girls and young women can't access women's culture, feminist culture, sex-based solidarity directly, help them do it through books. Save the hard copies of feminist books. Save the books on anatomy and physiology, including Our Bodies, Ourselves, and the Human Anatomy Coloring Book. This is especially important right now as libraries are going digital. Remember the burning of Hirschfeld's library and the many libraries that have been destroyed in many repressive regimes. Save the books for women. There's a reason the crafters of gender ideology have focused on breaking women's spaces, particularly lesbian spaces. There's a reason the funders of gender ideology have invested billions of dollars in co-opting gay and lesbian organizations and destroying the institutions that were ours, founded by lesbians, the presses, the bookstores, the music festivals, the coffee houses, the gathering sites. These institutions are spaces for intimate communication, for organizing, for community, for resistance among all women. When young women don't have access to them, it is much easier to convince them that these spaces never existed. And as the generation of Dykes and badass straight girls is medically modified, the vanguard of the next generation of progressives and women's rights campaigners is undermined, exhausted, mutilated, and quite literally disabled, unable to resist what's coming. As we witnessed the horrifying scenes at the Auckland Let Women Speak event last week, The path out and the way forward became clear. As the brave women and men supporting KJK did there, we must create intense, unquestionable solidarity and move forward through the dense social field an inch at a time, holding each other up. As the brilliant Helen Joyce recently said, it's gonna be house to house for a while. So as for individual girls, what is to be done? We must be the adults in the room. The distress of girls is growing. It's no wonder that girls are vulnerable to the idea they can opt out of girlhood, femininity, puberty, and womanhood. Adults can affirm the distress without affirming the conclusion that avoiding female puberty, using blockers, taking cross-sex hormones, and engaging in surgical interventions will somehow improve their quality of life. We need to work to understand girls' distress and despair and to give them the tools they need to understand the world as it is now and their power to make it a better place for themselves. Distressed girls need care and comfort and hope, models of female badassity, accurate information, and space to explore their distress, space to build skills at self-soothing and distress tolerance. Keeping transition on the table as a decision for adulthood may buy her time that puberty blockers won't. Parents report 3 specific strategies are key to helping girls redirect from the transition path. 1 is getting them off of social media. 2 is providing accurate, clear, precise, scientifically correct education about sex, sexuality, and sex-destructive medicine. 3 is deepening girls' connections with family members, other safe adults, pets, and nature. I've started to use the acronym BENT to summarize an approach for getting girls to adult human female, whether in working with gender questioning girls directly or with others around us. In the BENT approach, we must be brave and bold, empathic, exacting, and educational, no nonsense, truthful, and trustworthy. Sounds a bit like being a Girl Scout, right? It's useful to think about what to do in any particular situation by framing it in the public health model of prevention, primary, secondary, tertiary. Primary prevention involves preventing medicalization before it starts. Secondary involves minimizing damage and reversing course once a girl's been started down the medical path. And tertiary prevention means helping a girl recover from the effects of intensive medicalization. Detransitioners need tertiary preventive care. And when they go public at great cost to themselves, as they have been doing, they contribute to the primary prevention process of others, for which we have been grateful. Here are some specific ideas for helping tomboys, baby dykes, and other gender distressed girls get to adult human female. Interview any medical professional or therapist involved in your child's care to find out if they personally feel committed to an affirmation-only approach and whether they are constrained by policy in their workplace, profession, or state or local ordinances from doing anything other than sex-destructive care. When a child expresses questions about her sex, educate providers on gender exploratory therapy. It really is a thing. 2, make sure any provider your child works with understands that LGBTQ is not one identity. Make sure they can articulate an understanding of lesbian sexuality and identity development. Many healthcare providers and therapists don't know the specificity of lesbian history, lesbian health issues, lesbian sexuality, lesbian identity development. In fact, some are more comfortable with starting girls down the road to transition than with talking them about sexuality. Many girls also know their parents are still very homophobic. It can make doctors and other healthcare providers uncomfortable to talk with girls so young about sex, which is telling because many kids are put on the path to transition without having had a first love interest, a first kiss, a first consensual sexual experience. Transition medicine will destroy a girl's fertility and sexual functioning even before she's been able to explore the wonders of female sexuality, something many providers don't realize. So as you interview healthcare professionals, you also raise consciousness. Understand that providers are discouraged from asking questions. They aren't all exposed to the medical literature that Isadora Sanger presents in Born in the Right Body. They may not have been seeing the recent progressive resources provided by lesbian whistleblower Jamie Reed in the Free Press, or the fantastic new documentary Affirmation Generation. Share these resources widely with healthcare professionals and beyond. Resist at all costs allowing so-called SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity data, to be recorded on medical charts. Trans activists pressured the US government into requiring any clinic that receives federal funds to have a SOGI field in their electronic medical record system. So now all do. And patients are presented with this as an inclusive initiative. Knowing that you are a lesbian does not make your doctor more knowledgeable about lesbian health. Avoid agreeing to have this information in charts. And if you are a healthcare provider, stop registering it. Remember how the Nazis used Hirschfeld's mailing list to identify sexual deviants? Having SOGI data on a person's medical record makes anyone coded in this way vulnerable to discrimination and a range of medical mistakes among the more perhaps benign possibilities. For girls who are recorded as trans males in this SOGI data, a lot can go wrong, both in daily interactions with healthcare system and in broader sense, as these data are mined for purposes for which we have not consented. 3, in many states, parents lose the right of access their children's health charts in the teenage years. This can be overridden by the child signing a release of information form, even though they are not of the age of consent. Whether a girl is still a minor or is a young adult on your health insurance, it's reasonable to require that she consent to your access to her medical chart so that soft transition or harder transition is not going on without your awareness. 4, transition will not resolve depression, social phobia, the social difficulties of being on the spectrum, eating disorders, or PTSD. Most girls considering transition will benefit from trauma-informed care, the kind of gender exploratory therapy advocated by Stella O'Malley and the folks at the Gender Exploratory Therapy Association, as well as from EMDR, which is a trauma intervention. Use accurate and descriptive language for interventions being used on girls and young women. Show any child or adolescent or young woman interested in these processes what they look like, what their long-term effects on the body are. Listen to detransitioners. If the young person is still under your influence or on your health insurance, agree to discuss transition if she does the research. Give her assignments to write reports on each element of sex-destructive care and review each of her reports with her. Ask her to write pro and con papers or speeches arguing for and against early transition. Number 6, this is painful. Defund Planned Parenthood until it stops informed consent model that allows minors to access cross-sex hormones with no serious vetting or therapy or the awareness of their parents. Support instead feminist women's health centers that refuse to do experimental treatment. 7, when you've found physicians or other healthcare providers with whom you and your daughter feel safe, double down on the science. Engage in sex affirmation therapy. Ask the doctor to run hormone panels to determine if your daughter is in any way not female. If your daughter is willing, consider a pelvic exam, the same spirit of curiosity and sex confirmation. Both of these processes promote education for your daughter about her body, about what is normal and not normal in girls and young women, and open communication between your daughter and a doctor who can hear your daughter's discomfort and even dysphoria without hitting the panic button. Remember, empathy and education are key. Normalize the truth. Puberty is uncomfortable. Periods are messy and inconvenient. Indoctrinated girls learn that hating your period means you must be a boy and that period discomfort is dysphoria. Sexual harassment sucks. By talking about the hassles, stresses, and confusion of a female body in puberty, you get to provide accurate, empathic, and supportive connection and sex affirmation. 8, teach critical thinking. Normalize calling magical thinking and calling BS BS. 9, teach girls to set boundaries and respond to boundary violations. Get young women into self-defense classes, martial arts, strength training, and outdoor activities. 10, surround girls with competent, sane, trustworthy adults, male and female, who will be truthful. Dads and grandfathers and uncles who support girls exploring activities and roles associated with their interests and signaling their acceptance of a girl as is can be incredibly helpful to gender nonconforming girls. 11, if you have a tomboy, help her find clothes in a style she loves that fit her well. If she can't see herself becoming a lady, find her tailored clothes cut to fit. Tailoring girls' clothes is much cheaper than remodeling a female body to fit into boys' wear. 12, provide your daughter with stories of historical badass sisters and resistors so that she can imagine herself becoming a strong, competent, brave woman. Point out examples of contemporary images of strong women. Make stories of women's collective action, solidarity, and bravery visible to her. Make lesbian history visible to her. 13, always remember that your daughter is not the problem here. She's caught up in a wider social phenomenon. She's young and she's uncomfortable and she's trying to find ways of getting more comfortable. She needs your kindness and care and your firm, honest limit setting and the truth. 14, if you are in a toxic relationship while trying to raise a girl, please explore if you can safely exit. Watching her mother be disempowered is horrible for a girl's optimism about her future as a woman. 15, find support for yourself. Find yourself a great therapist. Talk with other adults concerned about what's happening. If you decide you need to homeschool your daughter for a while, include solid adults as part of her educational team and make sure there are a few gender critical lesbians among them. Lean into what's already been built. GenSpect, Parents with Inconvenient Truths About Trans, and WDI are all sources of support. Women's Liberation Radio Network, WLRN, is a radical feminist news source. And, of course, Standing for Women and Let Women Speak. These have demonstrated that just making a space for women to speak incites homicidal rage among the TRA. Maria Keffler has written Desist, Detrans, and Detox, Getting Your Child Out of the Gender Cult. And others of us are also writing books for parents. Write your own, or start your podcast, or plan your women's and girls' country retreat. Find those women. Be those women. Remember, bent, brave and bold, empathic, exacting, and educational. No nonsense, truthful and trustworthy. I've also thought about calling this approach TERF, or Terformation Therapy. Truthful, trustworthy, empathic, exacting, educational, reliable and responsive, female, focused, and feminist. But I've heard the word TERF was taken. You can decide, bent, TERF, or both. Getting as many girls as possible to adult human female in this era is going to require every one of us and many, many more. It's a difficult fight, but the high stakes make it worthwhile. Our foremothers and foresisters did not pave the way for us to enjoy the gains they made possible, only to have their granddaughters and great-granddaughters mistake destruction for liberation on the altar of transhumanism. Remember, the majority of gender nonconforming or gender questioning girls become comfortable with their bodies and identities and femaleness without medicalization. To interfere with their development for a profit-driven, century-old, debunked model of inversion, they have been marketed as a panacea for their distress in a deeply disordered world, is a profound expression of sexist homophobia and a betrayal of our obligation to distressed girls. I'll end with a few words from the poet Judy Grahn's History of Lesbianism. The subject of lesbianism is very ordinary, she writes. It's the question of male domination that makes everybody angry. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. HearShe. Come gather round, share, and speak freely, for this is the greatest power to defeat this trans tyranny. I'm going to be straight. First off, thank you, Amber. What an amazing speech. I didn't get to hear it all, but wow, just incredible. I hope to hear so much more from you. So I'm going to be straight. As Kelly J. Keene says, the house is on fire and the children are inside. We must not give up. We must not lose hope. Our girls and all women need each of us. We must give no quarter. We are worthy. We deserve better. First, I am grateful for Women's Declaration International for creating an erudite channel and space for respite and renewal for us weary women warriors. WDI educates us, allows for conversation, reminds us we are sane and on the right side of this fight. And we get to make new friends. I'm grateful for all of you. This is for the moms. If you're listening, you're in the right place, and we are glad you are here. You must find one friend to hold you up and know that you have the courage to fight. You are not alone. There are many metaphors apropos for the trans agenda. Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining is apt. This is the swiftest global capture in history. It may seem hard to believe, but we are still in the preventative stage of the trans global mass psychosis. It will get worse if we don't stop it. We must use all of our powers, of which you have heard much of today. I hope you feel strong. If the women of the West don't speak out and take action, how can women do so in the more oppressive regions of the world? Democracy also needs an informed citizenry, and that's definitely up to us. Today, on the oppressor's side, it is the self-proclaimed Trans Day of Vengeance. Yep, all loving kindness there. Let the bullies show their true colors, as they did in New Zealand. Send it to the presses, put it on brochures, speak. This is the moment. Let's not let trans get any further. For this fight, we need greater awareness, many more fighters. We must not back down. The world is peaking. Personally, when trans haunted my home, I took it on as the same level as any other threat to my child. I went the full opposite of the TikTok trans housing mom. Life stopped. I became laser focused. Any strike on the female body is misogyny. Who is asking you to dismantle your healthy body? FGM is the same by any other name. I learned the signs of cults, and this trans is a cult. No, we get one body, hard line. You can see my other talk on WDI for more information. I was able to deprogram her, and she is very well. We live every day as moms for the future of our children. If it was just about making them happy today, oh, how lovely that would be, but it's not. The focus is for tomorrow. Heroin can make people feel happy today, not so much for tomorrow. Testosterone gives a high. It's a controlled substance after all. Hormonal damage is permanent. Your brain doesn't just heal or restart. IQ and brain damage is also part of this trans metamorphosis promise of greatness. Step right up. Choose man-made transing FGM instead of natural puberty. Don't be left behind in the old ways. Evolve. Trust us. Like that picture of the surgeon here holding buckets of breast tissue as a Christmas gift. Shame on trans. If a child now chooses puberty, they are choosing cis, instantly classified into the oppressor, an outsider. This is why they are pushing so young to plant the seed and using puberty as a hard break for decision making. Puberty is not pathology. Our girls deserve better, much better choices than a Barbie doll or sold for parts. So what can we do? Let's get rid of these three pushes shown in this graphic. They are in your schools. Trans want to destroy your child. Trans is writing the check that our children's bodies are supposed to cash. Use images to fight, they make an impact. Join us at Gmail, HearSheHearShe, for anonymous, safe actions from home. We can all take action. Preventative is always better than curative. Point out, what freedoms do we lose when we gain a disability? Travel, comfort, scuba diving? What about addictions? Daily medical reliance. Opioids are used for trans too. If the veterinarian took off your pet's legs because the vet said it'll make her so happy, would we accept that? Are colostomy bags cool and give you freedom? We must speak the truth. Conscience over conformity. Ignorance is not an option. Us, the parents, are on the front lines. The women are fighting. We must join. Ask yourself about that elder man with so-called gender dysphoria, actually an AGP. How was your pretend oppression and trans genocide alleviated by the dismemberment of my daughter? No. How is it alleviated by being in women's change rooms or naked around children at the YMCA or stealing awards and medals and scholarships? Cheating? No, no. I'm not buying it. We've been had. This is grooming, access, opportunity, destruction of laws and rights. They call our children eggs to be cracked. We must use the term, check yourself before you wreck yourself. It is becoming a crime to put your child's wellness before this ideology. We need to make the lawsuits and get the press on it. Our girls are worthy. We used to know that older men and younger girls shouldn't be together in support groups or glitter families. This danger has not changed just because they wear a dress. Someone who wants you to destroy your body or demands tears over pronouns is not your friend. Trans is not kind, it is not LGB. Male violence and predators exist. Until that scourge is ended, we must be firm. Child and women trafficking is also a huge money maker. We must vote with every dollar and your attention online. The Amazon monopoly bans the books speaking out on the dangers of trans FGM and trans ideology. There is big money in the trans industrial complex. One girl can charge $1 million by the age of 22 and almost died 4 times. These sex reassignment surgery, there's actually a market called the sex reassignment surgery market, expected to grow 12% year over year, and states that the average age of onset of gender dysphoria is 7 years old. People are investing and literally making money betting on our child's dismemberment. Know what your banks and your investments are doing and donate to help women who are actually saving women. The trans hammer is making everyone into a nail. The man-made trans solution is making the problem. Trans TikTok moms, you gotta know it. It's the destruction of our next generation. China owns TikTok, and influencers are paid by the billionaires of the medical industry. TikTok is manipulating your child's mind using facial recognition and behavioral researchers to look at the data. TikTok can know if your teen is gay by how their eyes linger and their pupils change while staring at an image. TikTok can know before your teen does. The law, know it and use it. I get how that sounds being an American. But if enough complaints are filed and videos are given and lawsuits are created, the police will have to show up. The press also needs to be pressured. University hormones are handed out like candy. They're in pill and gel form now. All primary schools can trans your kid without even telling you. No queer theory. We must make it cool to be a woman again. All that we can do, all that make nature beautiful, how we're connected. The beautiful part of birth in our lives. Don't let the horror stories get a hold of them. Let it be known, being a woman is not a choice. Make our periods a superpower. Men cannot opt into oppression. A fetish is not a disability. I even expect trans to have their own parking spaces soon. Although those heels are horrific. When we put a fence around our hen houses on the farm, we do not call them fox-phobic. Because I said so is not a valid argument. Being offended is not a valid argument. Stick with sex, not gender. The concept of gender is lost. The identity word in gender identity is already being dropped. In law, it is sex. Do not be gaslit. The sky is still blue, not purple. In law, words still matter. Use them wisely. Never use trans rhetoric. Say the truth. For conversation starters, I act like I just found out. Make others defend the trans. I'll say something like, do you know mastectomies for 13-year-olds is happening? No, here in California. Do you know women are caged with men in their prison cells? Yes, it's happening. Do you know we're sterilizing our autistic children? No, all over the world. There are many questions set up like that. Make them come to the idea of, wait, are you talking about trans? And then they're in the position to have to defend it. Why is trans what we have in common with Iran? We used to think homophobia was bad. Watch Exulansic's incredible work. It is like watching the horror of the book The Giving Tree on girls' bodies. Thankfully, she can pivot with humor, empathy, science, and the necessary brutal truth. Orwell and Huxley were meant to be warnings, not playbooks. Trans are not about civil rights. Trans take our rights, do not obey. Cognitive dissonance hurts, and it hurts to watch others experience it. They may have to work through it. It may take some time. Ask them, why is it you're so upset? We're just having a conversation. These are only words, ideas, and understanding. If a teen girl is reduced to tears over a pronoun or a dead name, that indicates she is not stable, strong, capable woman for the future. Dead name is cult lingo to remove the child from the family ties, to be reborn. Our girls deserve to be stronger than this. We want more for them. The trans end game. If the oldest fact of humanity, like woman, man, child, can fall, all facts can fall. Rights and laws are just being destroyed, leaving men yet again with all the rights and laws. If the West does this, the rest of the world will gladly follow. What else is decided and protected in law by biology? Childhood, the elderly, disability, pregnancy, disease. If our biggest fact of humanity can fall, words have no meaning. One body, two sexes, no third gamete. It is the US who stands up. It is us who stand up for the right for our children to grow up, be healthy, intact, and love who they wish. That gives true freedom and protects our rights. It's time to gather and rally around again. Fists up, women's circle, and the children are in the middle. A main way that we've survived this long. Keep speaking, be brave, and come back to WDI. We are here for you. Thanks for listening. With wishes of strength, Shannon, Mama Turf.
I thought that I could do a bit of a screen share to show some stills from the show and kind of talk a little bit also about puberty blockers and why I think that's just such a key thing for all of this. I want to start with puberty blockers. You know, they're provided to children as young as I've heard 11, 10, even 9. They're often said that it's acceptable to give them to children because they're given for precocious puberty, but they don't want to mention the fact that when they're given for precocious puberty, they're given to children who are much younger so that they go through puberty at the normal time. When they're given to children for gender reasons, the idea is to suppress puberty entirely and then to try to mimic puberty by giving them the cross-sex hormones, completely taking out a lot of intermediate hormonal steps that are not replaced at any point by gender affirming care. And that would include luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, which have important roles in developing the nervous system. And I believe have significant roles in developing the ability to have a sexual response. And there's a lot of risks to puberty blockers. Gas Jennings has been living through some of them. And a big risk of them is that when they are growing, they're gaining weight, they're getting taller, and their bones are expecting them to start mineralizing and for the growth plates to start to fuse. And so when you deny a child sex hormones, you are denying them the appropriate bone fusion at the appropriate time. And that it all is supposed to happen at a particular time for a particular reason. And that is that they gain weight and get to the point where those growth plates actually can start to slip. And if they slip and then they fuse, they're going to fuse wrong. And the solution for this problem is called slipped femoral cap or slipped femoral epiphysis, which is a misnomer. The solution for that is actually to just take a big screw and just to screw it into the femur and try to hold it in place. So it's just, you imagine that that's happening in the hip. It's happening in other joints too. Any load-bearing joint in the body is going to be subject to this kind of problem from puberty blockers. And so you hear all these detransitioners talking about how they have all this joint pain, all this back pain, and they don't know why. their bones were supposed to fuse at a particular time when they got to be a particular weight and height. And so Jazz Jennings was put on it when he was only 11, and then he was pretty much immediately diagnosed with severe mental health complications, which would be depression and anxiety at 12, which they want us to believe is totally unrelated. But how could it be unrelated? They are aware of the fact that the progesterone, especially, was causing some of the problems, so they took him off of it. They kept him on the estrogen so that he would continue to feminize. He says in the show that the estrogen is what made him start to eat. It made him have this ravenous hunger. And now, of course, he's gained over 100 pounds, especially since he had the vaginoplasty at 17. So when they say that these aren't happening to minors, that's just a complete lie. There have been very famous cases where they happen to minors, and there's a lot of cases that are on record of them happening to minors that are not famous. So that's those hormones that I mentioned earlier that are very important for neurological development. This is actually part of a larger show, or a larger talk that I gave at another talks. That's on my YouTube if you want to see the full thing. This is just the part about Jazz. And so Jazz, because he was on the puberty blockers, his genitalia didn't develop because it didn't have the appropriate hormones. And therefore, when it came time to give him the vaginoplasty, they didn't have enough tissue, famously. And they talked about this at the show. And so his vaginoplasty immediately failed. And then they had to try to revise it and then revise it again. And so he was left with these large scars from skin grafts. And pretty famously also, like, as I mentioned, he's gained a lot of weight. His mother talked in the show about how she has to forcibly dilate him because he just doesn't want to a lot of the time. Why would he? And her big fear was that it would close up and all of her effort would be wasted. So I use this example because when you remove medicine sees women's organs as kind of just not useful unless they're actively making a baby. But the uterus has a significant role in regulation of hormones, and regulation of hormones has a significant role in delaying the onset of dementia and maintaining your neurology. And those other hormones I mentioned earlier that are just canceled by puberty blockers and not replaced, not even attempted to be replaced because it would mature the gonads, and they don't want that. Those have been implicated already in the development of Alzheimer's. And someone pointed out to me, well, it's only the high levels of these hormones that are implicated in Alzheimer's, and puberty blockers cause low levels. Well, the levels that you're exposed to as a child are coding your neurology for later in life. So if you don't have the normal levels as a child, that changes what is considered a high level for those underdeveloped structures. We are setting them up for Alzheimer's, in my opinion. It's not going to be good. Anyway, I feel strongly about it. Anyway, so this is a scene also where they confront Jazz about his dilation and the fact that he's not dilating in private, and he's doing it in their room, and he's leaving it all out. And so it's just the point of this is just to humiliate him on national television. So this was in season 7. So we're working our way to season 8, but I want to make sure people have a good foundation. And again, you can see this talk on my YouTube. He has undergone so much trauma, and he is being forcibly dilated on a daily basis while he's had to live at home for several years during COVID. He's finally gotten away from his parents and gotten away to college. And so that brings us to season 8. And season 8, they're just kind of pushing him to start dating. Like, so first he comes back from college and he says he wants to start dating, and everyone says, no, it's too dangerous. There's transphobic hate crimes everywhere. And then he starts going on dates every episode. And one of the dates is quite disturbing because they have him go and they meet this guy. He meets this guy that he's met on the internet, their first time meeting. And he'll see models for the show, the behavior of accepting a mixed drink that was already ordered and sitting out for him and just drinking it right down. So I found that quite disturbing in the show. In another date, this is in the finale episode that hasn't it's still paywalled at the moment, but he goes on a date with this other woman who really kind of forces a kiss, because they'd been leading up to that for several episodes of like, who's he going to kiss? Who's going to be his kiss? And as you can see in this shot, especially as she's like kissing him, his body freezes up, his fist is clenched, and he just kind of can't wait for it to be over. He actually shortly after this ends it. But this is supposed to be like the happily ever after shot. And of course, in several points in this season, they also in the finale they have Jazz out of frame here. He's sitting on top of his brother, giving him a massage, and everybody's talking about how great he is at massages and how great of a prelude to sex massages are. And all the while, his mom is like staring at him, and it's just very disturbing. They seem to be very actively marketing him for a relationship through the show, and then more broadly marketing the idea of sex work as a way to fund transgender surgeries. They had other characters this season, including a character named Jojo, who was talking about his plan to do frisky modeling. So in other words, sex work online. And Jeanette, the mother, was actively approving that and saying, what a great idea that is. And Jojo was doing that in order to be able to pay for breast augmentation and for other interventions. And Jojo, like Jazz, was also, it seems, puberty suppressed and has a lot of issues, a lot of very obvious issues. There's another episode in season 8 where they go to get waxed because it wouldn't be an episode of I Am Jazz if they didn't somehow call attention to the vaginoplasty or to the fact that Jazz used to have a penis. So they go to get waxed, and he's saying, well, I'm Latina, so I'm just covered in dark hair all over my body, and they're waxing this like hairless back. It's completely hairless because of the puberty suppression. Then he goes on about how he's not as hairy as some of the cis women in his family. And it's like, well, yeah, because they have testosterone. So it's just absurd. One of the most poignant scenes in the season 2 is where Jeanette is drunk, of course, and drinking with her friend, and they're talking about how Jazz used to have a penis, or how Jazz just doesn't have a penis, and therefore they wouldn't be talking about his dating life in reference to the penis when he walks in on them. He says, what are you talking about? And they say, well, basically, we're not talking about your penis because you don't have one. And Jazz says, well, I did used to have a penis. And it's just like, it really seems to be starting to click for him. This is a disturbing situation he's in. And then he because he's back home with his abusers for a few weeks, he even starts thinking, I don't want to go back to college. I want to drop out. But he does go back to college. And then the season ends with, well, in addition to showing off exactly where in Harvard he's staying, they do a pan of his room, and then they look at his view from his window and say, this is Jazz's dorm. And then he gets allegedly he gets a death threat. And they make a big deal about how this death threat is different because they know where he is this time, even though they show his house in every episode leading up to that. Very confusing. But then, it's all a big setup for how brave Jazz is, essentially. And so the season ends with them having this sort of like church get together. And, this was quite a bit calmer than some of the protests we've seen recently from trans activists with the punching and the, all of that. So they're all just out, and Danna, of course, shows up uninvited and sees that all is well because Jazz is so brave. Of course, none of them can iron, so the flags all look terrible. But it's pretty hysterical that they're actually sold as capes. This isn't an idea that they're all having. They're actively sold as capes. Yeah, that's basically season 8. It's very, very, very disturbing, and it's just very explicitly. The big themes are boundary crossing. So they have another episode where they all go to a goat pen and they do yoga inside of a goat pen next to goats that are actively defecating, like on ground that's already covered in that, and incest and Jazz's genitals and using sex work to pay for transitioning. And it's presented as so normal, but if you actually like watch it, it's horrifying. It's disturbing. I don't understand why she's not in jail. I don't get it. Just real quick again. This photo shows that LH and FSH. Those are the hormones that go between the brain and the testicles and the ovaries, that then lead to the testosterone and estrogen. So they're just cutting that whole step out, like it's irrelevant, and not doing anything. So they because they want to market the puberty blockers as reversible, and whereas in my opinion, it would be much kinder, and you wouldn't lose much if they actually just removed the gonads. I mean, it would obviously not be good for them, but it would be less bad for them than what they're trying to do.
This is broadcast national.
Why is your dilating gel in front of my TV?
Oh, I knew I left it somewhere. I dilate in here sometimes while watching TV. Dilation is a process that comes along with bottom surgery.
Okay, you can take the gel back in the room with you when you're
Yes,
done.
I can
though.
take the gel
You
back.
don't have to right now.
Here. Basically,
There's just no right answer.
you take this long acrylic object and insert it up your vaginal canal so that you maintain depth and width. It's really important that you do this because if you don't, your vagina will start closing up and it'll lose its depth and you won't be able to use it properly. Well, I love you both. Thank you for always supporting me. I'm going to continue stepping into my identity as an independent adult, and I just can't do it without either of you. So thanks for being by my side.
He's clearly furious at them.
We love you.
Love
We're always
All right,
gonna
have
be
a good
here.
night.
Bye. Don't forget to dilate.
I have woken Jazz out of a dead sleep and taken the dilator and put the lubrication on it and said, here, you take this and you put it in your vagina. If not, I will. But Jazz is bad, even when I'm home once a day.
So for now, you'll have to watch it for free. On the first 5 episodes are free on Rumble, Substack, and Odyssey right now. And then number 6 is going to be free shortly. And then I'm going to go back to some of the earlier episodes that I haven't responded to. I've really only gone in depth on season 7 and 8 and looked at some random clips from the show. And then much earlier, they block everything in United States that TLC copyright claims. So it looks like I can show you this one. I have a few channels on YouTube, so this is one called X Marks the Rot.
You have them? Yeah, look at them. We require mental health therapy letters, not because being transgender is a mental condition, but because it's a very difficult process to go through. It's permanent, it's going to lead, and there are going to be challenges. That's exciting, so congrats on that.
Thanks.
All right, what about the sexual stuff?
The orgasm.
Yeah.
The big O.
Did you get anywhere?
Here we are again. The big O question, and it doesn't get any easier to discuss it. I still feel uncomfortable.
Well, there hasn't been much change. My libido's still basically nowhere.
We know that when people are able to orgasm pre-surgery, they're very highly likely to be able to orgasm afterwards. Jazz does not know what an orgasm is. It's very important when you see, and although it is not something that's going to delay surgery, it's not going to be any easier for her to have orgasm.
This clip is on X Marks the Rot, and I put it in one of the videos too. I wasn't able to screen capture it, so I just recorded it with my camera. That's why it's pretty low quality. Apologies for that. But so essentially in this scene, they're with Dr. Marcy Bowers, and they're talking about whether he's had an orgasm. And Marcy Bowers, who's the one who did the surgery initially, and then he also participated in number 3. He is saying, well, they usually if you can have an orgasm before surgery, you can have it after surgery, but Jazz has never had an orgasm yet. Marcy Bowers has separately also said that none of the puberty suppressed kids have orgasms. And so in my opinion, it's almost certainly true that these other hormones that are being deleted and not replaced have a significant role in maturing the nervous system so that orgasms are possible. I don't think it's just a matter of having the equipment. You know, that's obviously not maturing, but it's not just that. otherwise they would be able to fix it later. And they can't fix it. And so they, in season 8, they also had a long digression about whether he was asexual, and a big discussion about whether he liked kissing or not. And there's some active coaching from Jeanette in season 8 where he says, "I don't really like kissing," and she says, "No, yes you do. Yes you do. It just needs to be really important to you." And so there was another scene where they were talking about being asexual, and she's like, "You're not asexual, right?" And then he goes on, "Well, no, I'm just demisexual. I really need to." So it's clearly very important for the producers for them to act like he's overcome the problems that were related to the medical interventions, and that's why we have all these 4 states and the need for him to kiss somebody by the end of the season.